Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I am your host, DelSheree Spinner. I am a novelist and a teacher, down to my last couple of weeks before we go back to school as we're recording this. So, trying to cram in a whole bunch of stuff. And one of those is I was introduced to a New Mexico press that I wasn't familiar with by Lisa McCoy from the New Mexico's Writers Group. So, I am excited to be talking to Zach Hively today about Casa Urraca Press, based in Abiquiu. Zach, go ahead and tell us a little bit about who you are and the press.
Sure. Thanks for having me on. I'm Zach Hively. I am an author, a writer, a columnist, and I got this wild confluence of everything a few years ago, 2019, 2020, just before everything shut down, that I wanted to bring this all together and start a publishing company really focused on championing particularly New Mexican authors, but also broader Southwestern authors. I just thought there was so much amazing stuff happening in the New Mexico and the Southwest literary scene. And yet I didn't feel like there were enough traditional presses championing it. So I kind of jumped into the fray with both feet, and here we are 6.5 years later, just still enjoying every bit of it.
That's awesome. I think it is funny with like New Mexico, particularly. We have some very big name authors, poets,
Mm.
artists from this area, but
Yeah,
we don't really seem to have a lot of avenues for getting work out there that are actually based here. Just
right.
seems so funny to me that we're like this hub of really wonderful art and literature, and it's just like, somebody else will pick it up at some point, probably.
Exactly. I have nothing but my own personal opinion to an experience to base this on. But my experience as a, way back in the day, a bookseller and whatnot, is we are really proud as New Mexicans of what all comes out of here, of the food, of the art. And then somehow literature feels separate. Working in a bookstore, it always felt like the local author's shelf was like the lesser books. Oh, you're just a local author. It's almost a pejorative saying local author. And what I found was, like you said, we have these big names, these great writers, but once someone makes it, and whatever makes it means is a New York Times bestseller, is published with the big five, we no longer think of them as local authors. And I have this thing I like to do when I'm giving a talk or doing something public. I ask people to name New Mexico authors. And DelSheree, without fail, I get someone raises their hand and goes, Rudolfo Anaya. And someone else raises their hand and says, Tony Hillerman, which makes someone else go, oh yeah, Ann Hillerman. And that's it. That's what we get. And I just go, oh, but there's so much more happening here. And I feel like New Mexico is so particular that maybe the East Coast publishers don't know what to do with us or something. I haven't figured it out. But there's this really interesting phenomenon where we don't recognize what's happening here as New Mexican literature. It's fascinating to me.
It is. And I wonder if part of it is for so much of the country, like the Southwest is still this novelty, whether
Mhm.
that's like going there to see, the Pueblo ruins or have the food or things like that. What it's like, I think a lot of people have in their mind, like the Southwest is this.
Yeah.
And like it's funny because it it makes me think back to like early literature, like even Brave New World and Aldous
Mhm.
Huxley traveling here and being inspired in a really weird way by the reservations
Mhm.
and how he
Yeah.
incorporated that into his writing. And so many of the others where it's like they came here, they experienced it, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting and unique. And it's incorporated in a way with a lot of writers, not everybody, where it's like kind of an oddity outside
Mhm.
of normal society. And I think that that has really persisted, even with people who live here, that like we have certain things that make us, New Mexicans particularly. And for whatever reason, literature just doesn't really seem to make the list all that often. And
Right.
it's like, I don't know if we don't think of ourselves as a hub of literary talent and achievement. How is anybody else going to see that as well?
Yeah.
It still seems like the outlier who gets noticed or picked up by a big five or becomes nationally recognized. Like, yeah, it's just like, oh, well, that's this crazy thing that happened, but that's not who we are. And
Right.
I don't know, it's mind-boggling because there's so many wonderful writers and poets in New Mexico right now who I think just are really under the radar.
They are. They are. And of course, I'm from New Mexico. I don't know what it's like for someone in, say, Illinois. Maybe they feel the same way. But no, I do feel like we are this highly particular set of cultures and histories and backgrounds and influences that this phenomenon has to be somehow particularly New Mexican. And you said it too. It's not just the outside looking in at us and not knowing what to make of us. I think a lot of times we from the inside, with literature in particular, have a hard time knowing what to claim or what is ours. I don't really understand it, but that's a big part of what we try and do with Casa Urraca Press is both take what New Mexicans are doing and give it to the world. Like the world deserves to read what we're saying, see what we're doing, but it's also to really champion us here too, to connect with other New Mexican readers and say, no, but look, local author is not a pejorative. Being a New Mexican author doesn't mean you haven't made it. There's fantastic things happening here. Look, we can connect with this. We can see ourselves in these books too.
Yeah. I'm just like, as a teacher, that's something that really means a lot to me because, like, the group of kids that I teach up here in San Juan County is about a third white, a third Hispanic, a third Native, and then bits and pieces that we've collected. I'm always so curious about how people end up here who are from wide flung places. And it's fascinating to me because even when I started with the public schools here, and they're like, okay, this is our curriculum, look through it, blah, 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 has great resources. And like my first thought was, okay, who are the writers within our curriculum I can use that represent my students? Are there any Native writers? Not really.
Mhm.
Are there Hispanic writers? There was a handful, but it was mind-boggling to me that like our curriculum, and granted this is a national curriculum, it's not one that was developed for New Mexico, but
Okay.
it was so lacking on either writers or stories that
Mhm.
really represented my students and would give them the opportunity to be seen in what we were learning about. And so it's really pushed me to find books, and a lot of books I get through the radio show end up in my classroom
Oh,
because
wow.
I'm like, well, where else are they going to find some of these books with accurate New Mexico history or stories of Native youth growing up in this area? And like, it really takes intention to
Yeah.
like help people from this area like actually see themselves in modern mainstream media. And it's
Mhm.
funny how like when something does pop up like Reservation Dogs, it's like, oh my gosh, like, there's a show based completely on like indigenous communities. Like, woohoo, let's go everybody look at it because it's still like such a rare thing. It's like, I don't know, just I think those pathways are still few and far between in a lot of ways to help those voices reach the wider public. And so
Yeah.
I love when I see programs and presses and just initiatives where it's like, we need to have more voices who represent like actual lived experiences outside of just particularly white mainstream American perspective, because we are so much more than that in this country, and particularly in New Mexico.
Exactly. And I almost think sometimes being here, it's invisible. I see two things with the authors I work with. There are those of us who grew up here and have to learn to see New Mexico as this particular special thing it is. And then there's the authors I work with who have come to New Mexico, have chosen this place as adults from somewhere else, and have this other perspective. And I think honestly recognize a bit of that range of experience that's lived here. I can't take credit for this idea, but many years ago I was interviewing the fantasy and science fiction author Daniel Abraham. And speaking of Mexican writers who have made it, and he goes, very much paraphrasing here, but he goes, New Mexico is this particular place, especially in the United States, where you can elect a mayor with a Hispanic last name, and the fact that he's Hispanic does not make the news. We see this. How many governors in a row now have we had that are Hispanic women? And these, I'll just call them the demographics, are not the noteworthy thing here, because we all went to school and had the Jacob family next to the Jaramillo family. This is just the way it is. And I think it's easy to not recognize how special that is.
Yeah.
That New Mexico has this stratigraphy of cultures, of histories, and we all do exist here together.
And so much of our history has brought us to the point where we are, both the good and the bad. And
Mhm.
again, like going back to like being a teacher here, it is fascinating yet incredibly frustrating how little we actually address any of that and talk about
Mhm.
it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like my public school education as far as New Mexico history was like, I honestly don't remember much of it because it was like one small section. Most of what I know about New Mexico history now has like my own personal interest as an adult, and particularly through the radio show, getting more books focused on the history and the lived experiences of New Mexico. And it's like, it is so fascinating, and there is so
Yeah,
much that has developed this area to make it
yeah.
the interesting, unique place that it is. And it's just fun because I'll like hear my students and even my own kids when they were in high school, they hated taking New Mexico history. Like, it's so boring. All we do is draw maps and learn dates. And I'm like,
Uh,
well, didn't you learn about like Pope's Rebellion or any of these really
uh-huh.
crazy events that have happened? And they're like, yeah, I think maybe they, I don't know, mentioned that once in the timeline or something. I was just like, oh my gosh, we're missing such a big opportunity here to really get
We are.
kids invested in where they're from.
Right. Well, and I think it's the power of story. It's right there in history, right? But for example, one of our authors is Thomas Chavez, who is a historian, and hearing him tell story of how these people are connected, what the forces at play were, and in the bigger picture, New Mexico is not, as I also learned in I think eighth grade New Mexico history, it's like we're not this isolated, set aside piece of history where it almost always felt like, oh, the American Revolution happened and world history happened. But New Mexico is this set aside thing. Let's just talk about, oh, there was Pueblos and then Spanish colonization and yada, yada, here we are. No, we're connected. And when you can draw connections between historical figures that like, wait, there's not that many dots to connect from this figure in New Mexican history to Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin, you start to realize, wait, everything's connected and our history is part of a bigger history. But it takes that story, right? It takes that connecting, and not just for young students, I think for anyone. What are we part of? And what were people's motivations and how was everything connected? And that's when we start to put ourselves in that context. And I think that's part of the power of fiction, of creative nonfiction, of poetry, is it gives us a more felt sense, a more emotional, empathetic sense of the people we're talking about, whether they're big historical figures or a made-up kid on a bike. We're still connecting with the history of a place, the stories of a place, the people of a place. And when that place is our place, we become more integrated with our own home. And I just think that's the power of storytelling. And we're human beings. Storytelling is honestly, I think, what made us human in the first place. It is just essential to who we are. And I think we forget that. Like you said, when it's, oh, and here's some dates. No, we're losing connection, we're losing touch with the story behind who we are.
I think that's so true. And just the impact it has on individual identity and who we
Hmm.
develop into as a person has so much to do with where we grow up and the influences
Yeah.
around us. And a big part of that is location and culture and politics and religion and all the things that make up a community. And
Yeah.
we get so, I think, just in our own little bubbles. And if we don't
Hmm.
have those stories of, oh, someone lives differently than me and they had a different experience than I did in the same place, like, whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the flip side to that is that my own story is valid too. We had this amazing experience. Amaris Ketchum and I have co-edited this anthology, A Year of New Mexico Poetry, and that comes out in September. And we very intentionally from the start said, we want this to be an open call throughout the state. We want anyone to be able to submit. We want voices from all over the state, from all experiences. How do other people live in this place, celebrate this place, love this place? And we didn't want it to just be the canonical, established best authors from the state. And we have those too. We have Lauren Camp and Levi Romero, the state poets laureate. We have Arthur Say, who's now the U.S. Poet Laureate. one of my favorite things about this collection is that we got these voices from all over. And I mean voices. It's not just, oh, let's check a box because here's someone from Deming, and let's check the box because here's someone from Aztec. No, it's this is how people live. This is how people talk. And we have so many poets in here who have never published a poem before. It's their first credit. And it's both directions what you were saying of people seeing how other people live and experience things, but also going, hey, there's my voice. There's me validated. That person talks the way I talk. That person goes to the same place I go to. And here I am in a book, but there's this really cool, I think it's an alchemy that happens. It's a magic that happens when you go, wait, my experience, my people, my family, my location belongs. Because look, here it is in a book next to the US Poet Laureate. It must belong. And it shouldn't need that validation. It shouldn't need that, oh, but I'm in the same book as Michel Otero or Jimmy Santiago Baca to be legitimized. But I think we need that somehow. We need to go, no, but look, we all are in this together.
I think especially with so many of the communities in the state who, a lot of kids grow up, even today, but especially even more true throughout history, where, if you're from a certain racial or ethnic background, a lot of those kids were not expected to go to college and so weren't even given those options. Nobody ever talked to them about how to afford college or apply, or, you're not going to excel beyond this predetermined level. So when you grow up with that messaging of, no, you're not worth the same as the mainstream society member, that really has a profound effect. And it takes seeing people who look and sound and live like you being recognized as valuable to really start changing those generational ideas of what different communities are worth. And we still have work to do on that in this state for sure.
We do. And it's like I said about Illinois or somewhere earlier, like maybe that's true everywhere. Of course, you probably heard this too. Everyone calls growing up, especially, this is the land of entrapment and you got to get out of here. And is that just true everywhere? Is that a universal growing up experience now in the age of you can just get in a car or on a bus and go somewhere? Or is that a New Mexican thing? Is that this, I've always wondered this, and this is the only place I grew up, so I don't know. But do we grow up with this implied like, oh, we're less than somehow, this is valid, you have to get out? I don't know. And I don't know how people who grew up in other cultures within this state feel. I just know I, like a lot of people, left. I had to leave to really realize this is what I wanted. That, oh no, what's happening here is special. It's not that experience I had in the bookstore of, oh, locals over here, but if I want to be a writer, I have to go live other places. No, screw that. I want to be a New Mexican author and a New Mexican publisher and a New Mexican champion of the incredible things that are happening here.
Well, I think it does take someone, kind of going back to what you said before, of maybe the East Coast, the Big Five, they don't always know what to do with our stories and our experiences because it's so foreign to them, that I do feel like we need people and programs and publishing houses here who get it, who understand why these voices are important, and who can look at them and say, no, this is a valuable story because it shows, how one group experienced something different from another. And I get, I wouldn't really be able to do that for specific communities that I've never been a part of. I wouldn't necessarily know how to, weigh in, or I don't want to use the word judge, but, if you're looking through submissions, you're like, well, I don't know if this voice is representative or, would particularly speak to a large group of people because, if that's not a community that I've ever interacted with, that would be harder for me to judge. And I think it is a unique experience living in particularly growing up in this area, that we need people who understand what that's like to be able to help promote and raise those voices and share those stories.
Yeah, it's something I try to be really conscious of in running Kazuhiraka Press is I want to be very conscious of not only publishing people who think like I do, talk like I do, look like I do, grew up like I did. And yes, you can make that a checklist of, from Albuquerque, white, middle class, but it's more than that too. Is there, what kind of cultural value, literary value, emotional value is there in these things other people are doing in publishing, or I'm sorry, doing in writing? And what can I publish? Who am I the right person to help champion? There are certain baselines that the press, because I believe in them, the press believes in them, that we won't cross. I want people who think differently than I do, but I only want to publish things that respect other human beings, that are inclusive, that say we're in this together. I'm not here to publish anything, anti-gay or racist, or they can talk about these things, they can explore these things because they're real, they're in the world we're in. But there's also a baseline of, no, we have to stand for something. V.B. Price wrote in an introduction to a poetry book many years ago how every writer has a slant, and anyone who tells you that they don't have a slant is lying to you. With the creative arts, there is no such thing as pure objectivity, and reality itself has a slant. So let's lean into that. Let's acknowledge what our slant is, that we believe in lifting people up, and we believe in different experiences belonging at the table, that these voices deserve to be championed, and run with that. So yes, it's not an equal opportunity. No matter what you believe, we will look at your work, but we really want to build this up to be not just Zach Hively Press with a bunch of Zach Hively clones. No, goodness, no. I want this to encompass as much as it can what New Mexico is, which is no one thing. I think if that's anything you can say about New Mexico in the literature here, is it is no one thing. It is impossible to define. We don't like boxes. I think we don't like being put in boxes in this state.
I think that's very true. It's funny because what you were saying kind of made me think. I want to say it was a couple of years ago in my class we were talking about symbolism, and so I was putting pictures up on the board of different things, and what does this make you think of when you see this symbol? And one of them was the American flag. And a lot of their answers were the expected ones, freedom, American, things like that. And I'd had one Native student who wrote down colonialism and hatred.
Mm-hmm.
And I had them write it down because I know my community and I know that people can get nasty with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered as I was looking at his paper, if he had been willing to, if he'd wanted to give his answer out loud, what would the reaction have been for some of the students? And could we have had a discussion about that? And with some of my classes, we definitely could have others. I've had a few particular students over the years where I'm like, oh, okay, you can have that perspective, but we're not going to voice it in class because that's just rude and disrespectful. And I think especially today in today's political atmosphere, that idea you were talking about of looking at a diverse range of perspectives, but doing so respectfully. We can disagree. We can have a different point of view. We can have different experiences and take different things away from that. But we have to be able to discuss it in a respectful way that's not denigrating other people. And that can be a really hard thing to do right now in the world.
It can be. And I also think that's the power of books, which is why books come under attack so much, is they help us see those nuances and understand that it's not an either or. It's not always right or wrong. It is how many people, like every person in every culture is their own universe, how many of those can coexist without one having to be more right than the other or better than the other. I think there's a bucket of things we can all agree is, well, maybe not all agree, but we all should agree, are universal for us to coexist on this planet. But the more you read, the more you enter other people's lived experiences through books, through stories, through talking, through genuine history, the more we realize, there are so many ways of being, and they can all be here at once. It's wild. It's wild to realize that when you don't know that inherently.
It is. It's funny. I had such an interesting teacher moment toward the end of this past school year. I'd had this one student in class who, throughout the year, had said so many not wonderful comments that the rest of his classmates would just look at him like, what the heck? And a whole range of, all the ists type of things.
Uh-huh.
And we had read Animal Farm, and then we had read a book called The Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. A lot of things about, judging and making assumptions and treating people who are different poorly just because they're different. And nothing really seemed to sink in with this student until we watched this really honestly, fairly cheesy Disney movie from the late 90s about oh gosh, my mind is completely blanking now on her name. Ruby Bridges, the
Okay.
first young Black girl to go to school in one of the Louisiana districts after they had been sued. And
Yeah.
for whatever reason, this cheesy Disney movie was the only thing that seemed to connect with him, because as we watched the
Wow.
scenes where she is walking up to the school and she's spit on, and there's this older white woman just screaming death threats at her and saying that they're going to hang her and all these horrible, awful things. And that was the first thing that finally got through to this kid. And he was just like, oh my gosh, how can they be yelling those things and doing those things to this little girl? She didn't do anything. She was just born who
Mhm.
she was. Why are they so angry at her about that? And I just looked at him. I was just like,
Oh.
yeah, that's pretty horrible. And we should not do that to other people. And he was just like, wow, I just can't believe that. And in my mind, I was just thinking so hard. I'm like, I really hope this sticks with you and sinks into your head. And you reflect on some of the things you've said this year
Yep.
and maybe start improving some of those viewpoints. And it was just like nothing else got through. But for some reason, that story of that little 6-year-old girl finally broke through all of those prejudices and all that indoctrination that he'd experienced from, I'm sure, a variety of things. And I was just like, I hope this made a difference and it actually sticks around in your head for a while. But
Right. We hope. And change doesn't happen overnight. Even Ebenezer Scrooge needed 3 ghosts to get it through his head in one night. And most of us aren't so lucky. But you do. You hope that each one of those builds up. It's the law of accumulation, right?
Yeah.
Every time you have to think through something different or you feel something different and it clicks, it gets that much easier to do it the next time. And you start to build a constellation of experiences. And that's where I try to understand that you do have to build a constellation. Not everyone gets to look up and see the whole sky. Some people don't look up and see any stars at all. They have to start acquiring their stars to be able to build the whole picture. And one piece at a time. It's one book at a time. It's one great teacher at a time. But it can happen.
It can. I love that. And I love your philosophy. I love what you're doing. I'm excited that we got connected and that we can share what you're doing. We are just about out of time, though.
Yeah,
it went really fast. But before we start to wrap up and sign off, just tell us some of the projects that you mentioned that are coming up this fall that people can keep an eye out for and where they can find out more information about the press and your books.
Absolutely. We have all of our books available at casaurracapress.com. That is Spanish for Magpie House. That's a whole other thing we could talk about next time, the magpies. All our books are there. Most of our books are also available through any independent bookstore, any online vendor. You should be able to look them up. We have the big one right now is the Year of New Mexico Poetry Anthology coming out September 15th. It features, I think it's 193 poets writing from New Mexico about New Mexico. Very excited for that. We have other books coming out this year too. We have Sister City and Other Stories by Michael A. Thomas. That's short stories. We have a book of poetry, Circe at the Laundromat by Michelle Holland. And we're working on a big catalog for next year. But yeah, we've got a lot on the website, casaurracapress.com. That's Casa, and then Urraca, URRACA, press.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I will put a link to the website in the show notes so people can find it really easy if they forget how to spell it as they're listening.
Great.
I kept was it 1 R or 2 C's? Every time I type it in and I just wait for it to pop up in the search bar to remind me.
Yep.
But thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. It was really great to learn more about what you guys are doing.
Goodness. Thank you for having me. Thank you for all the work you do for books and writers and readers.